Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. We go on a lot of different kinds of adventures here on the channel to kind of educate ourselves about the things that are going on around us and to show you guys some of the interesting places you can go. But not too often do we get to go to a place like we're going today. Today we are in Picher, Oklahoma, a place that is considered to be a ghost town in Oklahoma, but a recent ghost town, and it has a tragic story as to why. It's fascinating whenever you go through this part of northeast Oklahoma and see that this little tiny town has modern buildings, homes, vehicles that have just been left standing, and one mine that made everything toxic. Today we're going to be exploring the strange history of Picher and what brought this once thriving community to a population that dwindles into nothing today, and why it was important that people left everything. That's right, today we're going to go on a little fact-finding journey and discover what happened with the toxicity of Picher. As you come into Picher, it's really surreal to see all of those buildings. As you can see, it's quiet here now, with the exception of the noise from the road. Where once laughter filled the streets, the schools, and the backyards of different homes, now it's just a breeze through town. It's kind of interesting to see what you will find here in Picher, in the slabs of some of the former buildings that have now been abandoned and fallen. In fact, here we find the home of the gorillas. Believe it or not, the gorillas were actually very successful, and at one point in time even won a state championship. But there are no games played here now. There's no sound of joy on Friday nights, no lights towering above the town, no stories to be had of all of the good times and the memories. Instead, we are left with a shell of a former community and a more recent ghost town. In fact, on this very slab you can find a series of signs that explain a bit more of the story of the schools and also what happened in this very site. It's kind of interesting to see because many of these signs have historic photos of the origins of the community and also more recent photos taken just before the community closed up shop and left. It's interesting to read this one particularly though, because it has some very fascinating facts. In fact, this particular area of Ottawa County at one point in time was considered to be the national center for lead and zinc mining. In 1913, lead and zinc were actually discovered here, and overnight the township of Picher began. It boomed to almost 10,000 at one point. Now, during the World Wars, this humble, small Oklahoma town was responsible for about 75% of the production for bullets that were used. So in the entire World War for the United States troop, they produced 75% of the materials for the bullets. It's strange to think now that that could have come out of this community. Bullets typically are thought of as weapons of destruction, but typically you don't think about the production of them as also being something that could be destructive. However, it was. But as we continue reading, you can see the true story of destruction as the 20s fade into the 30s go on into the 60s, and ultimately we get to more present day. In fact, by 1967, the lead and zinc mining had actually ceased. However, there were huge piles of toxic, contaminated mine tailings that were called chat that were formed in the mountains around us. They were huge piles that you can still see today just outside of the boundaries of this small community. So what did these look like? Well, they just looked like piles of big rocks. Things that were extracted from the mines, things that were waste that didn't really have a place. They didn't look like anything too crazy. So, of course, because it's rock, they started using it around town on everything. It became the things that they would put on their baseball and football fields. It would be used in parking lots, at homes. People would even slide down them because they were tall mountains of fun. Unfortunately, those piles, because they were toxic, ultimately would be the detriment of not only the community, but many of the people who lived here. Here we see a bit more about the schools, and you can see that even the yearbook had Zinco on it, named after the mines. This was a huge part of this community, and you can see the buildings here that once stood in all of their glory. The schools, the other buildings on campus. It's interesting to see that it was just a regular, everyday place. It wasn't thought to be anything other than just an average community in Oklahoma, where there was nothing more than guerrilla pride. In fact, at one point in time, they had won the state championship in 1984, and they held that title for 33 years, all the way up until 2017. Again, this was a recent, very recent ghost town. But you wouldn't know it to see as we look around a bit more. It looks like it's been abandoned for years. Things are crumbling. Destruction is definitely taking its toll as nature starts to take over again. And as the cleansing process of what is happening in this area is kind of starting, it's a very different story here in Picher. The chat piles weren't the only thing that happened though. In 1983, the area became protected as part of an EPA Protection Superfund site program because the mines started to fill up also with contaminated water. In fact, in the 1990s, there was a study that was completed, and they found that there were elevated blood levels in all of the Tar Creek area children as a result of this. In the early 2000s, the government instituted a voluntary buyout program so that they could remove citizens for health reasons. But before the buyout began, there were 1,640 residents still in this area. Despite this buyout program, where the government would come in and offer money to the residents to relocate to a safer place, many decided to stick it out, and they did so for several years. And the population here actually in this area, despite all of this, is still very small. There are a few people who still have properties here in the area. Brave people, that's all I can say. But it was interesting to see how this timeline started versus how long it actually took for all of the execution of all of this. And throughout this entire time, there were other studies being conducted to find out information as to how that they could clean up this area and make it safe again. And it's not an easy task once the water's poisoned. The chat piles, they could move. But the water is a whole different story. In 2008, an EF4 tornado pictured here actually went through town, and it killed 6 residents that were still in their homes. It destroyed 150 of the homes on the properties, and the federal government decided not to render aid in this case because it wasn't safe to rebuild on these properties. Instead, they determined by the EPA that the town was too dangerous to inhabit. And so they canceled Picher's incorporation status in 2009. The town was fully evacuated in 2010, except for about 20 people. Now, despite having to relocate, many residents still return to Picher every year for a Christmas parade. And they call this their home, even though they can't live here anymore. I think that speaks to the community itself and the strong backbone that it had from the beginning, how hardcore that they were, and how they had come together for these common things and found community and family here. But with that said, now that we have the backstory of Picher, it's time for us to go exploring a bit. I showed you a brief drive-through earlier so you could kind of get an idea of the dynamic. But now let's go take a closer look. I think this one is going to really make you think about a lot of things, including just, you know, the impact that we have as people on the environment around us. So come with me as we explore Picher. You can definitely see where the tornado came through. A lot of slabs. And it's interesting to see how many homes really were here based on the slabs. And then there's bodies of water that are beautiful, but wow, it's interesting to know that they're so close to the mining. Like you can see where it was, like right here, and then there's like this beautiful water. Now I know that they've worked to put this area into a place that's safe once again. However, it's wild to know that all of this happened. Entrances like these that used to take you over to the pits are now completely closed off, and they're marked with signs saying no trespassing, U.S. property. And this is the area that is considered to be ground zero, the pits. On this side, a blocked entry. On this, a narrow road that leads to nowhere. It really does put you in the mind of Slab City when you come out here, because that's mostly what you see, slabs. Whenever the tornado came through and it decimated this area, and they chose not to rebuild, they left behind only a footprint of what once was. This was a large building. I don't know what it was, but it was large. It was right here on the corner of 30th. And as you can see, the area has been fenced off in such a surreal way with barbed wire to keep people out. It's wild to think that this was a regular everyday community like a lot of us come from at one point. Just minding their own business, doing their thing, living their lives. And now this. A bit of a closer look and you can see that this was a parking lot. There's stripes still there all the way across. And then as we get closer right here, there's actually an arrow to tell you which direction to leave the parking lot. So this would have been the business. Whatever business it was still pretty large. All services to this area have been cut. Poles have been demolished, lines have been disconnected, and now only weeds. We have reached another area that was parking, that the building is again gone. It's right next to this big building down here that was just a shell of its former self. Even though some of the windows had been boarded up, you could definitely see inside and see that there were pieces of the past dangling from the ceiling as the building slowly deteriorates. And marshals run the roads here, so don't get any ideas that you're going to go beyond these fences. Just don't do it. You know, one of the things that I enjoy about doing the travels that we do is that we get to see things and take with us the memories and learn lessons from the past so we can make better tomorrows. And coming to places like this, a lot of times people have the morbid curiosity that they want to go and just skirt over just a little bit. But it's not safe here. It's not safe. So the signs are here not only for our protection from what's inside Picher, but also from what we could have happen to us just from exploring in places we shouldn't. So keep that in mind if you decide to come out to Picher. There's a sign over here though, I'm very curious, let's read it. This one's interesting. This actually says that this one is being sold for delinquency, and it was put on the block 6/13/22. So apparently this section right here is not being roped off just because of what has happened in Picher. Instead, it's being roped off because it's uninhabitable because of taxes. Interesting plot twist. Now, I don't know exactly how that would work when it comes to taking over a piece of land in a section like this. I know there are a few businesses here who have moved into some of the abandoned spaces, and they use the land for various things. However, I just can't see that being a smart idea. I just can't. This one looks to be an industrial service building, and it is 3 stories tall. The windows, of course, are broken, boarded up, abandoned, left to ruin. Industry hasn't happened here in a while, and you can definitely tell. The paint's peeling, some of the bricks are even starting to crumble, and at the foundation you find plants starting to spring from below. As you can see, this is the school that was here, and it's been abandoned, boarded up, and left to ruin. Vines are starting to grow on the building, and there's this huge fence in front of it. But this building is one that they are actually repurposing for some things in the area. So you can see here that there are some more recent vehicles in here as well toward that back building. But here's where you would have found the vast majority of the joy that would have come from this town at one point. Now, not so much. Imagine, if you will, a sidewalk running through a community right here. Again, the pits are in the distance over there. And then in front of us, what looks to be probably some kind of business. There's two sets of stairs. It might have been a business, it could have been a church. It really is insane to think about this. This town was about the same size as my hometown at one point in time. And to know all the people who live in my little hometown area, the businesses and things like that, and then to come here and see what time and different circumstances have done, it really gets you to thinking. I think the moral of the story today, and I think I'm going to leave this here and then just show you the rest of the buildings and things that I find, is we need to protect our people and we need to protect our water. A lot of times we hear about all of these things that are going on in the world, and we hear these sensationalized headlines about water, 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 but are they sensationalized? Literally what made this community have to pack up and go was the fact that they didn't protect their water and their people. And as a result, this now is just a sad look at the past. I didn't know anyone in Picher. I had just heard the stories of the weird evacuation, and it piqued my interest. But getting to come here and see what really still exists is very somber. And the more that you move around, the more that you see that. These were people's lives. They'd lived here their whole life, many of them. These were their businesses. This is how they made their money. And then all of that was just taken. So, I'm going to close out on that and just show you around the rest of the community. And while I am, I hope that that will make you think about your environmental footprint. It's not that hard for us to do our part, to do the tiny things that we can, and sometimes it might not even seem like we're doing anything that matters. But in places like this, you see that every little bit counts. So, with that said, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, remember, we're not here for a long time, but we're here for a good time. But to keep that good time alive, we have to do our part.